Today, I have something mightily monster in store for you, something very special indeed, for today, I have a special guest. Yes. Yes, this guest is a true monster maker in his own right and a legend. This fellow has been involved with entertaining the youthful and the youthful at heart for many, many decades. He worked on such delightful properties as the Dark Crystal, Fraggle Rock, and also spent many decades as a toy maker and has delighted young minds with the likes of sectars, as well as what we are here to talk about today, Boglins. Yes. So, allow me to introduce to you the one and the only Tim Clarke.
Hey, hello everybody. So, what's next?
What is next? Yes. Well, before we get too far into the fiendish fun, I understand that you celebrated your birthday earlier this week. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
And how monstrous was that?
Actually, we did a photo shoot or a video for the new Boglins Kickstarter that we're going to be showing probably, I think, next week or the week after. And it's a very Boglins Thanksgiving. So it was a lot of fun.
Ooh. So perhaps turkeys from the bog?
Certainly. and cranberries from the bog too.
Nice. Cranboglins.
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to take this opportunity to wish you a slightly belated Boglin birthday and to present you with my own little quick creation here. I call him Squake, the birthday Boglin cake.
Very nice.
Excellent. I'm going to place this fellow up behind me. Feel free to let me know if he starts causing any mischief, jumps off the shelf, starts to eat some of the other monsters, who knows?
You never know.
So,
they're unpredictable creatures.
yes, they are indeed. So, I'm going to have to ask, going all the way back to the beginning of the Boglins,
Yeah.
You did a lot up before then. So which among your prior creations would you say was the most influential in the creation of the Boglins themselves?
Oh, definitely Dark Crystal. You know, having worked on Dark Crystal and doing the sculpting and building of all the mystics and working on the pod people slaves. Yeah, so a lot of that is the influence of the idea of using foam latex in order to create a creature that moves. And after we finished shooting Dark Crystal, and I was doing work on Fraggle Rock, and as the first season of Fraggle Rock was ending, I suggested to Jim Henson that we start designing and doing development of toy products at Muppets and presenting to the toy companies, because we were doing things that were so much more innovative than what the toy companies were producing. And I always say he gave me the best kick in the pants I ever got, because he said, Tim, it's a wonderful idea. I just don't want to do it. So when Fraggle Rock was wrapping up production, they put a lot of the puppet builders on freelance. And that's when I started exploring the idea of taking some of my own concepts and presenting them to toy companies. First of which was Sectors, was the first one to sell.
I remember that one very well.
Yeah, and then Boglins was the second one that sold to Mattel. And now we're doing a Kickstarter to raise money for the molding of the new Boglins. We've successfully raised enough money to do, I believe, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, 5. And we're hoping to do 6 and 7 in the next few weeks. If we're almost, ready to have the Kickstarter campaign fund the next one, and then we only have one more after that. So it's going very well, and I'm very pleased. It's been an amazing response, and I always thought there was a big audience for the return of Boglins, but I never realized how big. So it's been wonderful to see such an incredibly positive response.
Yes, the very moment I heard that this campaign was going on, I know I was quick to want to spring into the action. So many memories came flooding into me, as clearly they did for so many other people. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's been wonderful. I'm very lucky that Boglins did reasonably well in the States, but it did phenomenally well in Europe and Australia and Japan. It was a really, especially in Europe, Boglins went on to sell for another 7 years, and there were over 100 Boglin characters created.
Yeah, I had fun flipping through some of the various iterations that seemed to be Europe exclusive. I believe I recall seeing, was there a My Pet Monster Boglin hybrid? Am I correct in this?
No, that was done by an artist who did it as a custom piece for one of the shows we did at Clutter Gallery. So, no, there were over 100 mini Boglin characters created in Europe that have never been sold in the U.S.
Wow.
And the only way collectors get them is by buying them off eBay or through one of the fan clubs, online, and have them shipped. Yeah, and have them shipped.
Desirable as treasures, right?
Yeah. I mean, some of the Boglins, the original Boglins, are selling for crazy prices on eBay. And so now I'm glad that a lot of the ones that people have wanted for many years, they'll be able to finally get again.
Yeah. So going back to the initial creation of them, I was going to comment earlier, while researching, I saw that among your many inspirations was the Olmec statues. And that got me wondering, I wonder how many different things you sort of sifted through before that was a thing that sort of popped out. A part of me is imagining, what if you had landed on something like the Easter Island statues or something to that effect?
Well, it's hard to pin down any one thing as an influence because,
right.
As a visual artist, I kind of absorbed imagery, and then I'm not always sure of the root of where it comes out. But I have always had a lot of interest in pre-Columbian art, and I've always been fascinated by the design styles of the Aztec, the Maya, the Olmec, and many other Central American and South American cultures. My wife and I went on a vacation to Peru not too long ago, and it was like trying to be a living sponge. It's like just everywhere I went, there was something, that I was taking in as, ideas of where I could take Boglins and other things that I've done.
Makes me wonder of the prospects of taking South America by storm with a Boglin invasion.
Well, actually, Boglins did really well in Brazil when they came out, and one of the Boglins was actually a character on a TV program in Brazil.
Oh yeah,
and down there they were just known as Bogs. They weren't called Boglins. And so there's a big following in Brazil, and someday I have to go to Brazil and see for myself. So,
That
but
is
it's been the response has been amazing.
That is something I've noticed. I also talk a lot about music, heavy metal, and hard rock on here, and I've noticed through that anything that makes its way down to Brazil and becomes any kind of a hit, a lot of those people tend to really embrace it. I mean, there's fandom, and then they take fandom of a thing to sort of a new level in a lot of instances.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So, out of all the Boglins, or perhaps out of the original Boglins, is there a particular Boglin that you would say is perhaps the character that is closest to your heart, or perhaps is there such thing as a flagship Boglin among all of the hundreds and hundreds?
Well, Dwork is the one that is closest to the original that I sculpted and that we presented to Mattel. So as far as appearance, he looks the most like the original Boglin I created. So, I mean, that one has always been a favorite of mine. And then there's lots of other, some of the minis, like the mini Boglin in a hamburger. Oh, I actually have him here.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you can, how well that shows up, but that
Well,
was always one of my favorites. And I don't know, I have a lot of them, but it's been great. It's been a great 30 plus years of creating Boglins on and off.
When I was very young, I actually had just two, but the two I had, I remember it was Vlab, the blue one originally, and Drool. And it would be interesting to really go from sort of home to home and see what different children did back then. But for me, for some reason, Vlab wound up being sort of the leader of the two. He always struck me as being a little more serious, whereas Drool became sort of like the goofball whenever I played between the two, and somehow almost the closer friend to me between the two, if that made any sense at all.
Yeah. Well, I always say, and the way we're approaching Boglins now is Chris Cafoni, who's working with me on producing the Boglins. He said the great thing about Boglins is that there was no TV show, there was no movie, there was nothing that was instilled in kids' heads as to who the Boglins are. And the wonderful thing, and what we want to do now, is to get the Boglins back in kids' hands so they can create their own content. Because now with the internet and video and everything being so easy, like right with the use of your cell phone, that anybody can make a little, video short,
right, and
use the Boglins as characters. So we're going to be taking submissions to our YouTube channel, and we want kids and adults and anybody who wants to submit video shorts that we can then place on YouTube to show people all the different creative avenues you can take by using puppets and the Boglin characters. So we're looking forward to seeing what people come up with.
And it's interesting that you talked about how when they came in, there was not necessarily a show or anything else. I noticed in the launch of the Kickstarter, in this new phase of Boglins, you have started to implement a little bit of a lore now. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came about and what was the sort of thought process behind that?
When we launched the mini Boglins in Europe, they were broken up into tribes, and there were chiefs and spies and all kinds of different characters, generals, whatever. And there was always supposed to be a king that would be launched. And Chris thought it would be fun now to kind of do a spoof on Game of Thrones, but mired in the bog, for sure. So we'll be expanding upon that, and each of the new Boglin characters will have 3 horns, which was how you became a king, is once you developed the 3 horns on the top of your head. And so we're going to be introducing the 3 original characters of Dwark, Flob, and Drool. And then we'll be adding some new ones, like King Topor is going to be one of the new ones, and there'll be a map that'll be broken into different sections. And with each Boglin, you'll get a portion of the map and an explanation of, who that king is. And we'll continue that with the new kings next year. So right now we're going to be doing Wart, who was originally launched in Europe, but never was launched in the States. So, and he's a very popular character and highly sought after, so we thought it would be fun to bring him back. Then Topor, who's one of the lowland Boglins, and he's going to be a completely new character. And then we have Swag, King Swag, who is the king of the Soggy Boglins. And I did, I think a year or so ago, and I've been selling him on my website, www.totems.com, and he's been selling really well. And I thought it would be nice to make him into a larger, full-size King Boglin with the moving eyes, and come in the box with the cage and the bars. So all the new ones will be following that format. And we have 2 more that we're just about to get to the next level in the Kickstarter campaign. Once we hit 125,000, then we'll be able to pay for the next one. And we're going to leave it up to the fans to choose. It'll either be Swag or King Spunk. Spunk was one of the original small Boglins. So we decided to elevate him to being a king. And tomorrow, Friday, the 13th of all days, I will be posting, the images for Spunk and Swag, and then we'll leave it up to the fans which one should come next. So each Boglin character costs $25,000 to make the mold. There's a lot of parts because of the eye mechanism, the arms, and the way that they lock into the rubber. So it's a very daunting upfront, amount of money to get together to launch this thing. But thankfully, because so many people still love them, the campaign to fund them has been going really well. So we're really happy that we're going to be able to do some new things and that it's moving along so well.
That was something I was going to ask. So out of all those various parts and molds, what would you say out of all that fabrication, what is the most challenging part or aspect of recreating all of these classic characters?
Well, because I make Boglins myself by sculpting, molding, and making them by hand, I'm really well versed in all of this in order to produce new characters. And I've been doing it so long that it's kind of second nature to me. It's like the biggest thing I think is being able to sculpt in order to produce something that will come out of a mold easily, which means being able to draft the sculpt itself to the seams in the mold, and you want to limit those seams as much as possible, because takes less time to clean up or finish the product. And having, for many, many years worked with toy companies and doing injection molding, it's kind of second nature to me now. It's not, it's like I sculpt thinking that way. So, and yet because the rubber that Boglins is going to be made out of is soft and flexible, it is easier to get detail into the product. So, and also the process in some ways is much faster because we were able to take the original old Boglins and scan them into a computer and then 3D print them. And then I went in and added more texture because when you scan with a computer, it has a tendency to soften some of the detail. So,
right.
Yeah. So I wouldn't, it's like, it's all become kind of second nature to me in many ways. And I don't necessarily find it, frustrating or hard to deal with. It's actually been a pleasure. And I'm amazed at how quickly things get turned around, because when you used to have to model or sculpt a toy product from scratch in clay, it's a much longer process, I think.
Right.
And also, then you need to get into making tooled parts using a lathe to produce, intricate smaller pieces like the connecting joints for the Boglins themselves. So that usually means turning out on a lathe hand-tooled pieces of plastic that were then reproduced through injection molding. So a lot of these things now are much easier to do because they can be scanned in and then altered in the computer in 3D programming.
That must be part of the excitement, is having worked on this for so long, you've seen some of the technology and the tools to do the same task improve, and you learn not only just to make things easier, but just new methods of producing.
When I first started working in SolidWorks, most of the people at the toy company that I was working at that time were half my age, and I was engineering a part in SolidWorks, and then I was able to view it, from any direction or any side, upside down and around, and I was floored by how incredible it was, and I was just saying, like turning to the rest of the people in the design studio and saying, this is amazing. Like, look at this. I can look at it. But they kind of grown up with that technology. So for them, it was, it wasn't all that special. But for me, also because I was left-handed, and when I took drafting classes, the teacher, would approach making any model from a right-handed perspective. And in order to follow what the teacher was doing, I had to kind of think in reverse. And often, because I was left-handed, I would smear my technical drawings. And the teacher would always say to me, Tim, you do beautiful work and you come up with great ideas, but you always have, your lines are always smudged. And I said, yes, because I'm left-handed and I'm trying to follow you, and you're right-handed, and you approach everything from drawing from the left to the right. And I have to then kind of think backwards from what you're teaching me if I don't want to cross over my own drawing. So to be able to work on the computer and not smudge anything, to me was just, that alone was phenomenal,
You and I are not only on the same page, but on the same side of the same page. I'm actually left-handed as well, and also had my start in drafting. And yes, I think by now ink and graphite has probably been soaked into my DNA just through that side of the hand.
Right, exactly. So there's been lots of improvements and also improvements in material. The new rubber that we're using for Boglins is, I think, far superior to what we used back 30 years ago. It has less odor, it's longer lasting, and it is fully recyclable. Not that I think anybody wants to recycle a Boglin, but you never know. And the great thing about the box that the Boglins comes in is part of the play value of it. So
I think we lost you there. Oh, you're back.
Yeah. And so there, the great thing is that because the box is part of the play value of it, it doesn't get tossed, so everything about Boglins is kind of environmentally friendly, which is also a nice plus.
Very nice. And the great thing about having not only a great piece, but such incredible packaging, just by nature of having that awesome a packaging is almost environmental in itself, because you never want to throw any bit of that away at all.
Right, exactly.
Very nice. And it's fascinating to hear you talk about, putting all these different parts together and coming up with it. When I was young, of course, I was always fascinated in the monsters and the dramatic play, but there very quickly came a point when I would stop with the dramatic play, and I would just sit back and sort of marvel at the little pieces that you had in there. I mean, there were many times when I would try to gently almost turn the Boglin inside out just to get a better look at more angles of this eye mechanism, which is always such a wonder to explore.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, Franz Fazekis, who everybody called Foz at Muppets, was the guy who created a lot of the mechanisms for the puppets for Muppets. And he was a big influence on me and how I approach making mechanisms for moving eyes and eye blinks and facial expressions and hand movement, everything, because he always stressed to try and keep things as simple as possible to get what you want, but to keep things as simple as possible. And the main reason for that is that if something broke on set, you had to be able to fix it quickly and easily, as to not take up time. So that's kind of stuck with me through the years.
Very, very cool. Let me see here. Oh, so going back to the lore a little bit of the Boglins, I was curious. So along with reinvigorating the line and adding these new characters, as well as having a little bit of a story with the kings and kingdoms, is there any other discussion about expanding that further? I mean, obviously it was more about the play originally, but is there any talks about perhaps maybe a comic or a novel or even a field guide perhaps in the future?
Yes, I hope to do all of those things. We are, Mark Friedman at Surge Licensing is going to be working on helping us to develop Boglins into, something more substantial. Many people know Mark from his very successful launch of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So yes, it would be wonderful if down the road we get to do some more great puppetry with Boglins and, do something for TV or, cable, with Netflix, or I have thought about doing a comic book series and or a field guide, so that people will get to know every single character and who they are and where they are in the hierarchy of the Boglin kingdoms. So yeah, there's plenty of work ahead. Right now, my focus is really just trying to get these first few guys back out into the marketplace. And thanks to the Kickstarter, we're off to a great start.
What was I going to say? So with that in mind, it sounds like you have a lot of cogs turning in there about future ideas. So I have to ask, I guess this is the final official question, but
yes,
what in your mind would be the ultimate Boglin? Let's say the sky was the limit. You had an unlimited budget and time to do whatever you wanted in the sort of Boglin verse. What would that ultimately look like?
Well, the idea of doing a television series would be wonderful, just because Boglins are kind of sarcastic, crazy characters who have looked at the human world and then warped it based on their own perception. And that's basically what I always thought of them as being, is like they're kind of tricksters and jokesters, and they look at the human world and look at how it functions, and then they kind of make a mockery of it and also reinterpret it in their own way, and it doesn't always jive with how we perceive ourselves. So I think that would be great fun. I would say one of the things that I always thought would be really wonderful is to have one of the Boglin characters as a gigantic hot air balloon in the Macy's Day Parade. And I think that's because I think it was Paul Sarge was the guy who created the very first hot air balloon the helium balloon for Macy's. And he called them reverse marionettes because you were holding the ropes to keep them, from floating away, but you were still operating them by pulling the strings. And Paul, it's Tony Sarge, not Paul. Tony actually trained Bill Baird, who was had a very famous, well, most people know Bill, his most famous thing was the goat herd scene in The Sound of Music with the marionettes. And then Foz and Marianne Harms, who worked at Muppets, had worked with Bill. So Foz had made a lot of the mechanisms for Bill's puppets, and then he came to work with Jim. And so it's kind of like, I appreciate the people who came before me and came up with wonderful and amazing concepts, which, can still be used and interpreted or reinterpreted, to this day. There's this wonderful foundation in the puppetry community in the US that goes back to Tony Sarge and Bill Baird and Jim, of course, and, now is, flowing through me out into the world of, with the craziness of Boglins. So
and
I'm very lucky to have that, behind me.
Yeah, and I feel like we've entered an area too where there's been a little bit of a pushback. Of course, we've gone through the decades of CG being in everything, in all things, but I feel like there's still a little bit of pushback to have more things that are done practically. I mean, of course, we see that with things like Baby Yoda and other sort of more popular such characters and items.
And I think a lot of that is the immediacy of reaction when you have a physical puppet in front of you, and there's the wonder of improv, of the interaction between a human being and a character. And I think that's what made Muppets and Sesame Street, so successful, was the play between the adults and the puppets. And always on Muppet Show, it's like some people who are guest hosts were really, really comfortable with, you know, working with Muppets, and some weren't, you know, and people like John Denver, you know, it's like he totally stopped. He was just like a kid, you know, he just totally stopped thinking about that as being, you know, a character, and just believed totally that it was real. And I think that's a wonderful part of, you know, puppetry, is when you can achieve that. I remember doing demonstrating some puppets at Toy Fair, and every once in a while, you know, somebody who was a buyer would come, and I would do little shtick pieces with the buyers, and when they would start talking to my hand rather than looking at me, that's when I felt like it was being successful, because they kind of just totally forgot about me being there.
Right.
And it's a wonderful, in fact, puppetry as an art form originally was considered a part of magic and being a magician. And that's, I think, where it comes into play, is creating that illusion of, you know, life, and people just going into it hook, line, and sinker. And I think, you know, that's one of the wonderful things about working with puppets with kids also, is because they so easily fall into that. And even my granddaughter, who's 1.5 now, she saw the video of me for the Kickstarter of me out kayaking, and the Boglins coming and attacking me at the picnic table. And she doesn't even speak yet, but she knows sign language. And she was signing to my son, "I want to see it again. And she just kept wanting to see it over and over. I think she was fascinated, one, that I was in it, and then the interaction between me and the puppets. And when she came up, we were shooting the Thanksgiving Day, you know, special. And when she came over, it was interesting, because I wasn't to see how she was going to react to seeing the Boglins for the first time in reality. And I thought, oh, I was like a little worried. I was like, is she going to be scared, or is she going to? And the first thing she wanted to do was give one a big kiss. And I was just like, This is amazing. This is amazing. So it'll be interesting to see because my son and my daughter-in-law and my son's mother-in-law are in the Thanksgiving show. And so it'll be interesting to see how she reacts to seeing them now on, you know, on the screen. So
she may want them to have their own seats at the table for dinner.
Yeah. Yes. I don't doubt it for a second.
That reminds me of many years ago, I took a trip to New York City, and I wound up in it was Washington Square. And I remember it was in the middle of summer. It was nice, kind of warm, you know, fun day. And he had all the just street performers out. You had a guy on piano and maybe 2 or 3 jazz bands. And the one thing that stood out to me, there was this fellow who had with him, it was a miniature, like a fluffy dog, marionette. And he just had this dog running around, just maybe 4 or 5 feet in front of him. And it was interesting to see people passing by, both adults and children. Every once in a while, this dog would start chasing them, and they never really even looked at the guy. They were all just reacting to this little dog.
Yeah. There was I wonder if it's the same guy. He had a character that was like a little poodle, and he would interact with people on the street.
Yeah, I think that was it. Yes.
Yeah, and he was very good at puppeteering it, because it looked very lifelike.
Yeah. Well, I got to share. So many of your projects have inspired me as well. I like to consider myself a master of monsters, and I draw monsters and entertain, but none of that would happen without being personally inspired. And I'll say it goes all the way back to the Sectars. I actually had one of your Sectar hand puppets, and I remember the fur juxtaposed with the hard plastic in the mouth, and of course Boglins, and all the fun I had with those. And I also, it goes back even further. I have to tell you, one of the most awe-inspiring things I had ever seen to this day was I was a wee little tot, just a tiny little monster maker, and I believe it was a Head Start field trip to the Pittsburgh Children's Museum, and there just happened to be this big. It was a puppet. At the time, I do not believe it was just Jim Henson. It was just sort of like a puppet, like a celebration of puppets in general. There are all sorts of shadow puppets, hand puppets, everything. And the one thing that stood out to me is they took us by this room, and displayed, stood up, propped up in a glass case, was the full body puppet of one of the mystics.
Yes.
And that image has been burned into my mind to this day. I was so awestruck, and I was so little, so this thing towered over me and every child in the line. It was such an imaginative moment. I could just see that thing coming alive and popping out, and a little bit intimidating, but you also got just enough of the personality just by being in front of it and seeing what it was.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I know. Jim donated, I think they did that puppet, a special exhibit about puppets, and then Jim donated one of the mystics to the museum. And a lot of people have told me someday if I get to Pittsburgh, I'd like to go and see him.
Yeah, he was there. I was going to say, I do not know if he remained. I know I went there maybe decades later as a young adult, and it was still very much there. They also had that was when they did an actual Jim Henson sort of tribute display. So everything that has hand in, there was something, involving it there.
Yeah. As far as I know, he's still there, and there has been a ongoing exhibit of the Dark Crystal puppets and a lot of the Muppet characters at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens, New York City, and then at the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. And I have to say, it's very surprising to see my work in a museum. I thought I would be long gone before that would happen. So and especially when I went to the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta, the gift shop had puppets that I had designed for a toy company. Then I walked in the first section of the exhibit dedicated to Jim is a recreation of his office space in New York, and the Dark Crystal Gartham, which was one of the first toys I sculpted for Hasbro, was sitting on his desk. Wow. And then I round the corner, and there's a whole section dedicated to Sesame Street. And one of my first jobs working at Muppets was to help feather Big Bird and to work on Snuffleupagus. It wasn't the original character, but each year we would have to replace them and rebuild them. And then to turn the corner again, and then there was a section there dedicated to Fraggle Rock and Traveling Matt, who was one of the Fraggles I had created and built, was there. All the Fraggles, or most of the early Fraggles, were based on drawings that Michael Frith did, but then to take that drawing and make it into a three-dimensional object, just like with Dark Crystal, Brian Froud would draw the characters, and then we had to interpret them and make them into three-dimensional objects. And then there was, I think it's over now, but there was a whole exhibit just dedicated to Dark Crystal.
Hmm.
So, to go throughout that entire museum and see how stuff I had worked on was represented there was, really incredible.
And you're probably like me. You're probably just thinking, just by virtue of the things that you're creating being monsters, would probably never suspect that they would wind up in such high esteem in the places they are. But these things stick in people's minds, and they stir the
Yes.
imagination.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty humbling in many ways, so.
Excellent. So at this point, I guess the last thing, I mean, the real questions are all done, but I just want to ask, essentially, if there's anything else you want to share with the Monster fans, either about Boglins or about any other imminent or future projects you have coming up.
Well, I always have an excess of product ideas that I want to do and develop. I think mainly I would like to expand upon puppets and television. I would also like to showcase, if it's possible down the road. There's some really amazing puppeteers that I saw at Dragon Con in Atlanta, and they have a whole section of Dragon Con that is dedicated to puppeteers, and the different varieties of people and what they're producing and creating was really spectacular. And so I would love to do some kind of showcase TV show for new forms of puppetry, because I think sometimes Muppets is overly influential in the US, and people don't realize that there's a lot of different forms of puppetry out there. And so that would be a wonderful thing to have happen, just because I was so inspired by what people were doing down there.
Yeah, the idea of just another style of puppetry really taking on.
Yes. Well, from rod puppets to marionettes to bunraku to shadow puppets to, everything is just there. There's just an incredible expanse. In fact, my wife and I went to see at the Brooklyn Museum, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music in New York City. There's an Iranian man who's done an interpretation of the Shahnameh, which is a very ancient folk tale. And the whole thing was done with shadow puppets, and it was phenomenal. I was just like awestruck, because they combined animation, shadow puppets, and actors in costumes all behind a screen. And the animation was projected on the front or the back so that you see it, but you're looking at it from the front. Then they had the shadow puppets, and it was seamless. The movement, you didn't always know when it was an actor or a puppet or an animation. And the timing and it was just amazing. It was just incredible. Probably one of the most phenomenal puppet shows I have ever seen. And I think it's called Fire of Feathers or Feathers of Fire. And I think it can be seen on the internet now for, a small fee, but it's really exquisite and beautiful.
Makes me think of, I was actually privy to see, it was a preview showing of the Broadway performance of King Kong about 2 years ago. It came out.
Yes.
Yeah. About a 20-foot King Kong puppet with more workers than I care to count on it. And then just as amazing, if not more amazing than Kong himself, was all the mechanisms they had in the stage to transition the stage from New York to the boat to the island right in front of you. Was almost a curtain call.
Yeah. 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 There's some amazing things that, you know, it's just incredible. It's an incredible art form, and it's amazing to see the varieties. I mean, like Warhorse and, you know, so many things, you know, just outstanding work.
Hmm.
So
Very cool. Well, Tim, thank you so much
you're
for
very welcome.
and teaching us with your marvelous monsters, with your bodacious boglins. Please keep
Thank you.
on with your creativity. Never stop. And we look forward to all that you have coming up in your future.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And stay monstrous.
I'll do my best.